Hello, my fellow truth warriors, Jared here. Today I want to continue a conversation started in our Flat Earth video. Conspiracy theories, totally honest and rigorous searches for truth are having a moment in modern culture. There are people who think Robert Mueller was unearthing a pedophile ring, people who think a Melania Trump body double regularly appears with the president, people who think vaccines are giving all our kids autism and cancer, and of course, flat earthers who will be having their own cruise in 2020. Proposing that a secret plot exists to hide the truth from the average citizen is not new. For years we've been asking questions like, who really killed JFK? Did we really land on the moon? Is the government hiding aliens? But I'm not here to destroy these arguments with facts and logic. Instead, I want to talk about how conspiracy theories are different today. Namely, that they're a microcosm of a much larger issue. That the idea of expertise is slowly evaporating. So join me as we dive into why this matters in this Wisecrack edition on conspiracy theories. And no spoilers ahead this time. Most conspiracy theories are founded on an extreme distrust of so-called experts. Flat earthers don't trust physicists and NASA, anti-vaxxers don't trust their physicians or the FDA, and QAnon doesn't trust anyone in the deep state unless they happen to be surreptitiously unraveling the truth of Pizzagate or something. To find out how we lost belief in our experts so thoroughly, we first need to go to the birth of the idea of expertise. The expert is a fairly recent invention. In his book Nervous States, Democracy and the Decline of Reason, sociologist Will Davies locates the birth of an expert class in the wake of the destructive religious wars of the 17th century, when tons of Protestants and Catholics murdered each other. People had to grapple with a basic question. In a world recently ravaged by hatred, how do we build a world based on trust rather than fear or anger? Thomas Hobbes gave one solution. Writing in 1651, he argued that a strong government scaring the crap out of everyone would instill trust between subjects. If you cheated, stole, or murdered, you had a big bad Leviathan, i.e. the sovereign, waiting to dish out justice. At the same time, the merchant class had a similar crisis of trust. How can I trust that this person can pay me back? Merchants and financiers faced the same problem with the world's monarchs, who were interested in raising large armies with borrowed money. How could I trust the king or queen who promised that they were good for it? Even the scientists who, armed with the scientific method, would go on to build the foundations of our modern understanding of the world, had this problem. How do I trust other scientists who I've never met and the observations they claim they've made? The answer was the expert. As Davies writes, pioneering communities of merchants and gentlemen introduced strict new rules for how their impressions should be recorded and spoken of, to avoid exaggeration and distortion, using numbers and public record keeping. Merchants began extensive bookkeeping, which could be scrutinized by anyone looking to do business with them. Britain's Royal Society, an organization seeking to advance science, had its foundations in trust of one's peers. Members were allowed to debate about theoretical issues with each other, but never question another's observation of an experiment. Essentially, if you spotted a new object in space with your telescope, we could debate about what it was, but not whether or not you actually saw something. The Bank of England was formed in 1694 to bridge another trust gap. How could lenders know the crown was good for the money they borrowed? The monarchy developed a growing array of record-keeping techniques in order to convince financiers that it could be trusted to honor its debts. This era also saw the rise of coffee houses and an intellectual culture within them that wielded math to solve modern issues. Numberphiles who wanted to look at death rates, birth rates, or the economy, for instance. These coffee houses were also the birthplace of the insurance industry, where expert underwriters could evaluate risk in a transparent and objective manner. While all this may seem like a glaring necessity of civilization, the rise of these experts marked a huge transformation in how society works. As Davies writes, in the 1670s, the suggestion that political questions be settled on the basis of numerical facts was radical. This idea now dominates the modern world, as most aspects of life are dictated by bureaucrats and public policy. But sentiment towards these experts seems to have changed. For anti-vaxxers, medical doctors are blindly handing out vaccines ignorant of their dangerous effects. For flat earthers, basic observations are contested. If, when an astronomer spotted an object in the cosmos during the age of the Royal Society, we might believe them and try to replicate that observation, today there's no room for trust. This basic lack of trust is mirrored in this quote from Patricia Steere in Netflix's Flat Earth documentary.
An event like a I'll just use Boston bombing again. I'm not going to believe any of those events are real unless I get my leg blown off.
This is a common refrain for flat earthers. Only believe what your own eyes tell you.
Science just throws math at us, whereas we go and say, hey, by the way, there's Seattle. You can see it right now with your camera. That's it. A picture says 1,000 words.
This kind of thinking is an overt rejection of the very idea of expertise. As Davies writes, to trust in science is to trust in the capacity of people to report and record things in an adequate fashion. We're willing to take their word for it, rather than constantly refer back to the thing itself. This rejection marks a shift in conspiracy theories. Older conspiracy theories, like those surrounding the JFK assassination or the moon landing, might exhibit a distrust of the government and take some interpretive leaps. And to be fair, the government has done its fair share of shady things. These older theories might try to make sense of the life-changing events of the day. In a world where one felt cheated or disempowered, they helped bring order and clarity. But many of today's popular theories, according to Professor Nancy Rosenblum, are all conspiracy and no theory. The purpose of conspiracy theories is no longer to explain reality or offer some account of the world. Instead, the point is to erode trust in public figures or institutions. There's perhaps no better example of this than Flat Earth, who, unlike other conspiracy theories, only offers the flimsiest of motivations for why a governing body would lie about the shape of the Earth.
So when it comes to science, think of it this way. If you have 450 years of them showing you it's a globe, how much is that worth to them to keep it? It's worth everything.
Whereas a faked moon landing could plausibly be motivated in the context of the Cold War with the space race and all, the best motivation flat earthers can dig up is some vague plot to keep us dumb and buying stuff.
They want people dumb, blind, deaf to the truth, so they can inject you with their vaccines and their public schooling. If
previous popular conspiracies were centered around history-changing events, 9/11, the moon landing, the assassination of JFK, today's conspiracy theories like Pizzagate just seem to be pulled out of thin air. There's no momentous event that demands our reaction. In the Flat Earth documentary, for instance, star flat earther Mark Sargent admits the entire movement was birthed from him randomly looking at a dusty book on the shelf.
When you get bored enough with normal conspiracies, you're looking for something new. There was a certain novelty to it.
Anti-Vaxxers, on the other hand, may not be pulling from thin air like Pizzagate or Flat Earth. They are, in theory, reacting to concerns over autism rates, and at least their villain has a reasonable motivation. Would pharmaceutical companies put profits over people? Probably. But like other modern conspiracy theories, anti-vaxxers seek to attack people's trust in elites. A fair share of anti-vaxxer evangelism doesn't try to recruit you, so to speak, but to slowly sow doubt about the safety of vaccinations and the trustworthiness of pediatricians. Even parents who haven't officially hopped aboard the anti-vax truth wagon may opt not to get a flu vaccine because of some manufactured concern about mercury or cancer, and after all, who dies from the flu? For Rosenblum, the point is to erode faith in institutions, the medical establishment, the scientific establishment, anything you can slap the word establishment on. Outside of conspiracy theories, however, a similar lack of trust permeates our society, and not all for bad reasons. Today, governments, think tanks, and other organizations are full of, quote, experts touting solutions to modern problems. For instance, economists who, armed with facts and figures, know exactly what monetary policy we need to implement, or if the economy is growing or shrinking. These proclamations, especially when proposed with an air of certainty, should be looked at critically. So while we might be wistful for the days when we trusted the people who knew things, it's important to remember that this wasn't a utopia. Like all things, experts come with their fair share of problems. It turns out, experts are a great help in invading and conquering foreign lands, or even putting down rebellions, as Davies notes. And the main customers of the aforementioned nascent insurance industry were slave ships looking to insure their human cargo. Other research has suggested that there's no purely rational thinking, as even expert thought is unavoidably affected by emotion. Today, people view expertise as in service to something else, an agenda, emotions, a conspiratorial plot, and so on. For instance, while some economists will point to the GDP for a recovering economy,
First quarter GDP, and it is a whopper.
others will look at median wages,
Middle-class folks are starting to get paid as much as they did before the recession.
or unemployment rates, or the percentage of people living in poverty. Even a basic statistic like how many people live in poverty comes with debates about what exactly defines the poverty line. The point is, many elites will point to whatever metric makes their camp look better, so it's hard to unilaterally condemn this suspicion of them. And you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to know that experts can and do have political agendas, or they simply fail to see the collateral damage of their policies. Davies writes that the resentment of elites that we see around us today is fueled by a sense that the promise of experts is now bogus. Revelations of their personal moral failings via media exposés, leaks, and social media searches make the distinction of these figures ever harder to sustain. Their claim to represent our interests becomes nothing but a shroud for their own political agendas. And that's why this distrust leveled at experts is so complicated. It's sometimes justified, sometimes not, but it raises a much deeper problem for society. As Rosenblum argues, it's not just trust in institutions or science that's at risk, but our trust in each other. Whereas older conspiracy theories often targeted those at the top, the wealthy elites pulling the strings, today's conspiracy theories often target people on the bottom as well. Survivors of school shootings who are called crisis actors, scientists and teachers deemed spherist shills, pizza shop owners labeled pedophiles, and YouTube channels theorized to be fronts for the Illuminati. At the same time, people at the top who were formerly the perpetrators of conspiracies can now be the victim, like, say, people in the highest offices of government. Davies argues that our lack of trust in elites or each other has resulted in a kind of Hobbesian war of all against all. It's not that we want to murder each other, but that in any kind of disagreement, we distrust the basic premise of our so-called opponents. They're either a hypocrite, a liar, politically tainted, or so on. The phrase virtue signaling, for instance, is not an attack on the virtue itself, but rather a statement that it's done inauthentically. Similarly, arguments have become a place to win this so-called war rather than to seek truth. The internet has become not a place to advance knowledge, but a place to go to see people destroyed or dunked on in the game of truth. And it's this gamification of truth that is particularly worrisome. Beyond the internet, we see tons of knowledge produced for think tanks, lobbyists, or advocacy groups. And while some might simply suggest that a marketplace of ideas will separate the good ideas from the bad, Davies warns that the facts alone won't save us. There is no overwhelming victory of truth against fiction, especially on the internet. While some platforms have recently cracked down on conspiracy theory content, paranoia and fear are still incredibly shareable. We could also ask if fake news and post-truth are more symptoms of arguments accelerating to the point where only superficial judgments are possible, as Davies writes. Instead, he suggests we defend slowness, the ability to restrain our impulse toward reactivity and commit ourselves to thoughtfulness. So what do you think, Wisecrack? How can we continue to build a society based on trust while still promoting healthy skepticism and criticism? Or do we truly live in a post-truth society? Thanks to all our patrons who support the channel and our podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button